Welcome to Supreme Court Madness, in which the most famous and influential Supreme Court cases of all time fight head-to-head. Starting off with the Constitution weekend, we have Marbury v. Madison going against Dred Scott v. Sanford. Despite Dred Scott's immediate influence, the case loses out to the precedent set by the decision made in Marbury v. Madison that established judicial review.
Next, we have Gitlow v. New York against McCullough v. Maryland. Since the decision made in McCullough v. Maryland regarding the constitutionality of a Bank of the United States is now outdated, Gitlow v. New York wins for its continued extension of the First Amendment to the states.
First case we have today is Gibbons v. Ogden against U.S. v. Lopez. In a close matchup regarding the Commerce Clause, U.S. v. Lopez loses out as a result of its decision being extremely specific, while Gibbons v. Ogden establishes a much more applicable precedent against the power to regulate navigation.
To finish things off, we have New York Times v. U.S. winning against Heart of Atlanta Motel v. U.S. With New York Times v. U.S. further establishing the rules of which executive privilege can be claimed, it establishes a much more relevant and powerful precedent than that of Heart of Atlanta Motel v. U.S.
To start things off in the Bill of Rights region, we have Miranda v. Arizona against Texas v. Johnson, with Texas v. Johnson further strengthening the power of the First Amendment in extreme cases. Miranda v. Arizona wins for its establishment of the Miranda rights that are exercised thousands of times each day by those who are arrested.
Next, we have New York Times v. Sullivan against District of Columbia v. Heller. With District of Columbia v. Heller defending the right to bear arms under extremely specific circumstances, it loses out as a lack of result of applicability to Sullivan's precedents of actual malice.
Moving forward, we have Engel v. Vattel against Lemon v. Kurtzman. With Engel v. Vattel establishing the unconstitutionality of the composition of school prayer in public schools, it wins out against the Lemon test standard established in Lemon v. Kurtzman.
Finally, we have Gideon v. Wainwright against Tinker v. Des Moines. While Tinker v. Des Moines established the Tinker test for the disciplinary actions of schools, Gideon v. Wainwright wins for its continued influence in its establishment of the requirement for appointing an attorney to those who cannot afford one.
On the civil rights region of our bracket, we have Brown v. Board of Education versus Mapp v. Ohio. Although Mapp v. Ohio protects evidence found unconstitutionally from being used, Brown v. Board of Education wins due to the landmark decision declaring the unconstitutionality of the separate but equal school facilities.
Next, Plessy v. Ferguson faces against Loving v. Virginia. While Loving v. Virginia was important for its protection against prohibiting interracial marriage, Plessy v. Ferguson destroys its competition for its followed effects from declaring public facilities separate but equal.
Wow, next we got a great matchup going on. Obergefell v. Hodges and Griswold v. Connecticut went head-to-head in this one. Although Griswold v. Connecticut provides the American people with the right to privacy, the provisions in Obergefell v. Hodges have a greater effect on the people and the fundamental right to marry.
Finally, we finish off with Roe v. Wade and Regents of the University of California v. Bakke. California v. Bakke upheld the right of schools to factor in race in determining college admission. Although this decision is still widely argued, Roe v. Wade has had a radically larger weight in terms of opposing and supporting sides clashing. For the reason of a greater effect on the public of the United States, Roe v. Wade takes the win.
In the realm of political process, Citizens United v. FEC has had a tremendously more radical effect on the political system than Schenck v. US has, with Citizens United providing the regulation of political campaign spending for organizations, and Schenck v. US providing the grounds for conviction for resistance to induction. Citizens United cleanly takes the win.
Next up, we have Baker v. Carr against Korematsu v. United States. With Baker v. Carr setting the precedent of how courts can intervene in redistricting disputes, Korematsu v. U.S. loses out as a decision that supports the limiting of people's rights during wartime is widely debated and less prevalent.
Our next matchup is a battle of two heavyweights, Bush v. Gore against Buckley v. Vallejo. While Buckley v. Vallejo established the guidelines on campaign financing moving forward, it proves to be a less influential version of Citizens United, and Bush v. Gore wins this one for its establishment of the unconstitutionality of recounts.
Finally, we have Nixon v. U.S. against Shelby County v. Holding. With Nixon v. U.S. establishing the role of the Senate to vote on an impeachment trial from the House of Representatives, and the Shelby County v. Holder case requiring certain states and governments to obtain federal pre-clearance to change voting law, Nixon v. U.S. takes the win for its importance to the working of impeachment trials and their effect of the American people.
We start off the Sweet 16 with Marbury v. Madison against Gitlow v. New York. Gitlow v. New York extends the provisions of the First Amendment, but Marbury v. Madison takes the win in this matchup due to its ability to check the other branches and deem the constitutionality of legislative acts.
Next, we have Gibbons v. Ogden against New York Times v. United States. Gibbons v. Ogden gave the right to Congress to regulate interstate commerce, strengthening federal power. But New York Times v. U.S. proved its haters wrong and came out with the win, guaranteeing that the First Amendment did cover the right to print materials and tell the truth to the public.
Wow, what a great one we got up next, folks. Yeah, so we got New York Times v. Sullivan against Miranda v. Arizona. While New York Times v. Sullivan proved that you can't print libel and slander words, Miranda v. Arizona showed the importance of people knowing their rights in a legal manner and proved to be more influential in arrests.
Moving forward, we have Gideon v. Wainwright against Engel v. Vitale. Although Engel v. Vitale ruled it unconstitutional for official prayer in public schools, Gideon v. Wainwright established the right for a person in trial to be accompanied by a counsel no matter what and proves to be more influential.
Next, we have Brown v. Board of Education against Plessy v. Ferguson. Wow, what a matchup. Although Plessy v. Ferguson made a stride toward better rights with the separate but equal clause, Brown v. Board's ruling overturned that of Plessy versus Ferguson, and for that reason, wins this matchup.
Next, we have Roe versus Wade against Obergefell versus Hodges. Although Obergefell versus Hodges guarantees the public the right to marriage for same-sex couples, Roe versus Wade gives women the right to an abortion under the 14th Amendment, which proves to be a more influential decision in other cases, and for that reason wins this matchup.
Moving forward, in what's deemed to be a close matchup, we have Citizens United versus FEC against Baker versus Carr. Although Baker versus Carr established the right for federal courts to step in a manner of redistricting, Citizens United versus FEC established the guidelines of campaign financing on a massive scale and wins the matchup for that reason.
Next, we have Nixon versus U.S. against Bush v. Gore. With Nixon versus U.S. setting a more powerful precedent over which executive privilege can be claimed, it wins out over the one-time precedent set by Bush v. Gore regarding the recounts.
Welcome to the Elite Eight. To start off this round, we will look at Marbury v. Madison against New York Times v. U.S. New York Times v. U.S. limited the power of executive privileges of the president. Although this caused the government to be more transparent with the population, the decision in Marbury v. Madison had an overall greater influence, and that is why it wins this round.
Next, we have Miranda versus Arizona against Gideon versus Wainwright. While Gideon versus Wainwright established the right to be appointed an attorney, the creation of the Miranda rights after Miranda versus Arizona had a greater effect by informing the people of their rights at the time of the arrest. Miranda versus Arizona moves on to the next round for this reason.
The matchup you guys all been waiting for, Brown versus Board against Roe versus Wade. So in this one, we got a major landmark case which allowed abortions to be a woman's decision in Roe versus Wade. This decision, however, was less impactful than the overturning of the separate but equal clause that was stated in Brown versus Board, and for that reason, Brown versus Board wins this one.
Next, we have Citizens United versus FEC against Nixon versus U.S. Although Nixon versus U.S. was a major landmark case, it was extremely restricted to a specific group. Citizens United versus FEC takes the win on the grounds that it was more influential in terms of overall political process, and for that reason, Citizens United moves on to the next round.
To start off our final four, we have Miranda v. Arizona and Marbury versus Madison. Miranda v. Arizona established the Miranda rights. Although the Miranda rights protect the general welfare of people, it does not affect those who do not violate the law. Therefore, Marbury v. Madison, which can ultimately affect everyone by creating judicial review, has won this round for its influence.
Next, we have Brown versus Board of Education and Citizens United versus FEC. Citizens United versus FEC was tremendously important with regards to leveling the playing field for campaign finance and spending, but the influence from Brown versus Board determined that the separate but equal clause was unconstitutional, is more influential for everyone nationwide, and therefore takes the win in this round.
In the finals, we have Marbury versus Madison versus Brown versus Board of Education. Brown versus Board was a major landmark case that determined the unconstitutionality of the separate but equal clause, but the creation of judicial review by the decision of Marbury versus Madison proves to be more influential in giving the judicial branch its power, and for that reason, it's going to win this March Madness bracket. Thank you.